somehow my main academic specialization became Japanese folk song. And how that happened, well, I've probably narrated this before, but the simple background story is I was interested in American folk stuff, and then through all these random happenings at Yale University, I ended up learning Japanese, just because my favorite teacher when I discovered linguistics was a Japan specialist. Eventually, somehow, I got interested in Japanese music enough to explore it a bit, but it took me a long time, various other chance background trails, till I ended up at the University of Michigan, found the country's leading expert on Japanese music, found a library full of recordings of Japanese music, and discovered, I don't know how many, but it was probably 40 or more LPs and some little 78s and other recordings and cassettes of Japanese folk song, minyo. A lot of these, there was one album of 264 tracks of field recordings, by which I mean these weren't the professional folkies like like Peter, Paul and Mary, standing on stage in fancy outfits with definitely having fancy accompaniment of great skill on traditional instruments. Professionals with contracts with record companies. We had those recordings too, but these were the village amateurs. Work songs being done without the instruments. Who's out there, pounding barley while somebody's plucking a shamisen? It might be a good idea, but that wasn't what these recordings were. And I really got interested in that. The same way that in my interest in American folk music started with the urban folkies, and then, like so many others of my generation, we eventually realized, where did these urban folkies get these songs? From rural folkies, of whom there have been field recordings for a long time, often at a very different style. Maybe they're not singing all these fancy harmonies, and maybe they're not even using instruments. So I discovered the same thing about Japan, and I decided I really liked this phenomenon. And there are many other Japanese musics I got involved with for a lot of different reasons, but it was the folk that I was interested in. That's what I am. So I wanted to do eventually my PhD on that. And so I did. Now, what's that world of Japanese folk like? See Hughes 2008, but if you can't afford the 95 quid it costs now, get it out of the library. Or even better yet, I'll tell you the simple summary. Japan folk song, they have a saying, Minyo wa kokoro no furusato. Folk song is the heart's hometown. And there's a very strong sense of the hometown, the native place, the village, whatever, in Japan. Never mind that most of the young population was not born in a rural village anymore. They're born in, maybe they're raised in Tokyo or Osaka or some big city with 6 to 12 to 20 million people in the surroundings. And they, those people, their parents maybe, one of them at least may have come from the countryside, or their grandparents definitely, and somebody's buried out there, and at the ancestral festival time in late summer, they may go back to the home village and hang around a bit. And so there's a certain sense of a hometown, but that doesn't always mean that you're going to learn that hometown folk song that was so big there. These songs, even though they migrate like any folk song or an Irish tune or something, they migrate all over the place. Irish tunes end up in northeast England, and then no one knows they're Irish, and they've changed their title and they've been modified a bit. They end up in Canada somewhere with maybe Irish immigrants, and they've changed. So same thing happens with Japanese songs. And nonetheless, as the 20th century got along and tourism grew, there was even with more people 80% urban rather than 80% rural 100 years earlier, the local villages trying to hold on to an identity often grabbed folk songs as a way of doing that. Also other folk performing arts, festival musics and stuff. And they began to take songs that they were just singing for fun, maybe or while working, and realize, oh, well, this is one that we really like here. This could be our identity badge. And they would then put a prefix to the title that had the local place name attached. There's one up in the north, a famous one, Isashi Oiwake. It's in a town up in the very north in Hokkaido called Isashi. They didn't used to call it Isashi Oiwake because they were in Isashi. They were just singing their local song, which Oiwake is the name of a town in Nagano, way down in central Japan, that migrated on the coast with fishermen, changed all over the place, and they still stuck with that. They just called it Oiwake. But then, this is a short anecdote, I hope, around 1900, they were a major herring fishing town till then on the coast, and then the herring stopped coming. And so did, then a railroad was built that missed that town up to Sapporo it went, and suddenly nobody was going to Hisashi. The 12,000 residents no longer could make all this money out of the migrant workers who came in for a few months to catch the fish, or the government officials who came up because of that big industry. No one was coming anymore. And they thought, how do we get people, now that there are trains and a growth in domestic tourism, how about this song? Whenever they come and they hear it, they like it. Whether it's the geisha singing it or just people they're working with. So the mayor and the head of the local Shinto shrine and Buddhist temple, they all got together, the big dignitaries, and got all the best singers and said, okay, we're going to use this song to publicize. And I could go on forever if we get started. It's, so to make it simpler, this was one of the first steps towards what is now happening all over Japan. Towns hold on to their local song, and villages, and they put their place name on the front of it, and they now have national contests for one song quite often. Hisashi, for that song, since 1965, so that's 51 years, they've been having a national contest. It's now up to 4 days. When I went once, it was, I think, 260 people I listened to sing it for one day, and then the best 50 came back the next day. They got judges in another room, trying to stay awake. And they're up to over 400 people now from all over Japan. They have prelim competitions. They bring in a couple from every year from Brazil or someplace, from where a lot of Japanese went to work in the old days, to South America or Hawaii or other places, and some of them keep these songs alive. So there is this strong identity sense. And that's one of the things I research, and I try to compare that with the big city situation of the urban pros. And this is one example of what issues arise there. There's one urban pro who told me long ago now, 38 years ago, he had a problem. He often on television, as this became more and more popular, he would sing a local song from his home province. And he said he would get letters or complaints, or if he went back home, people would say, why did you sing it that way? We don't sing it like that here. And he told me what he told them. But this is a folk song, it's oral tradition. Every town, every village, even if this song is spread all over our little prefecture, it's not the same in every place. And even in the same village, as I've experienced myself, not every singer sings it the same. So what version are you saying I'm not singing that's the local version? This is what he was telling me. And this has always interested me too. And this becomes even more of an issue when now you have intangible cultural heritage designation, the whole UNESCO, the stuff that all started in Japan. And they do try to figure out how to designate various art forms. They struggle with folk song partly because it's too diverse. Yeah. Anyhow, that's some background of the Japan folk song scene. And the final important thing of this particular blab probably is about how it fits into the education system. Now, from the 1870s, Japan, 1860s and 70s, suddenly had their doors opened by the West after 2.5 centuries of isolation. And suddenly, in the end of the 1800s, massive modernization, westernization. And this included music, clothes, everything else you could think of. When they started a national curriculum for the first time for the whole national schools, the course of study, the national course of study, that already started in the 1870s. For music, they brought in experts from Germany, from Boston, Massachusetts, to help them figure out how to teach music. And they weren't teaching traditional music. They were teaching Western music or new compositions they would make that they thought the kids would like, with very important Japan praising lyrics of an elegant type, but maybe sung to Auld Lang Syne or some Western melody, or at least harmonizable with Western chords, which you didn't have before. Well, anyhow, never until the 1970s did anyone have to learn any traditional music in a Japanese school. It's amazing the tradition survived in a way, as younger people are more and more westernized. Jazz was a big thing by the 1930s, rock by the 50s, American folk. They had their own folk song movement, which is different from my folk song, Minyo. Those two are different worlds. And anyhow, they tried in the 70s to get all middle school students to sing one folk song a year. They'd learn one in their first year of middle school. which was from a particular place in Japan, a particular hometown, which unless you were from that hometown had no identity meaning for you. Why do I want to learn that song? What's that to do with me? Second year, another one from a different part of Japan. And the third year, another one that was much harder. Problem was, they'd forgotten to realize their music teachers couldn't sing these. They were all, one of the teachers told me, the big arguments we have when the teachers get together to discuss things in a monthly meeting is there any music after Mozart? Does anyone care about Brahms? And this was almost said as a joke, but the gal was serious. And they never talked about traditional music and whether this should be part of it. They couldn't do it. So after 5 years, they stopped trying to do that. And they didn't start again until about 13 years ago. The early 2000s, they changed it again. And now they require everyone who gets a license to teach music in the schools must be able to play some Japanese instrument to some degree. Koto, shamisen, shakuhachi, whatever. And they must be able to sing some kind of Japanese music in a traditional voice. Maybe not great, but they have to take lessons and be examined just a bit. And strangely, the teachers are kind of going along with this. And they are doing, and also the other crucial thing, which they wouldn't do long ago, despite my urging and asking, now, if you have a little old granny living, a mile from the school who's a wonderful folk singer, why don't you have her come in and help teach? And one of the teachers told me, this is cool. When I try to teach the kids, we're listening to a recording of folk song, and I say, let's try it. And we sing it, and they say, teacher, you're not very good at that, are you? Ha, ha, ha. And she says, this is fun. I like to demean myself so they can hear what a challenge it is, and I'm not being the big boss lady. But they've also accepted they have to bring in people who can do it if they're really going to make this work. And now they use these local resources, the human resources they call them, which they weren't using before. Somebody told me back around 1980 something, said, how come up in northern Japan, why don't you get that little old lady down the street who I know well who could teach this? Oh, she has no qualifications. I said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Well, she doesn't have a teaching license. I said, well, wait a second. You do, and you can't teach this thing that's demanded by the national curriculum? Who doesn't have any qualifications? I put it just a little more gently than that, of course, but yeah. So anyhow, that's the kind of world I was dealing with, and now they really are working on it more, but it's actually too late. Because the kids are just too westernized. However, they have also decided, rather than forcing them to all learn the same song from some other place, which they still have in their book, in the school books to look at, a few of these very popular ones, they also try to make sure they get a taste of their own local community songs, which maybe no one under 70 can sing anymore to any degree. A lot of them have died out. The local barley threshing song, they haven't threshed barley since 1950. The local boat rowing song, that went out in 1908. The steam ferry began to do the river. There's no point in rowing the boat anymore. And there's no one alive in the two places I'm thinking of with these examples, the barley and the boat, who have done this in real life. There are people whose father or grandfather have done it. And they have tried hard to impress to the kids, you want to understand what it was like for your ancestors, for your grandma maybe? We'll do it through this song. This is one of the things that I'm very interested in, is and trying to support. How do we make this happen,